Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode 6 of the season 2 of the World History and Geography GCast as presented by Gibsonian Institute. Today we will be looking at the Judicial Branch. So getting right into it here. The Judicial Branch is discussed in Article 3 of the Constitution. And the main purpose of the Judicial Branch is to interpret and administer laws. So the laws, of course, are made by the Congress, the legislative branch, and then handed over to the Judicial Branch to make sure they're good, that they're legal laws. All right, and that might sound confusing. Aren't laws? How do you break a law with a law? And we'll go over that with what is known as judicial review in a little bit. There's three major types of courts in the Judicial Branch. The first, of course, is the Supreme Court. There is one Supreme Court, and its primary duty is to decide whether state and federal laws are constitutional, meaning laws that the federal government makes or state governments make do not break the Constitution. We're going to come back to that again. There's appellate courts, which are court of appeals. They do not hear cases directly. There's 13 districts. What happens is they're going to see what is known as trial courts first, and if they want to appeal, they'll go to that appellate court. There are 94 district courts in the United States. Rule of law and judicial review. Rule of law is the principle that no one is above the law, including the government. This goes very much in line with what we talked about with the Magna Carta. All right. So basically, the law is the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution is the basis of all laws made in the United States. Any law made in the United States has to be cannot break what the Constitution says. So the Constitution is like the foundation of every law in the country. If it goes against the Constitution, it's not a good law then. All right. If it goes against the Constitution and it should be good, then the Constitution needs to be changed. All right. But first, that's not up for the Judicial Branch to do. So if the Judicial Branch thinks that it's a good law, but it still breaks the Constitution, they're going to say that that law is unconstitutional. What first has to happen is Congress needs to pass an amendment, and then that law could be upheld by the Constitution. So the Constitution needs to be changed before a law can come in and do something different, not vice versa. If that makes sense, it should. All right. So the law, the Constitution is what rules us. Okay. Everything, we don't answer to the president. We don't answer to Congress. We answer to the Constitution. These people that are put into the government are the ones that carry out the Constitution. All right. Now looking at judicial review. So when a court interprets the meaning of the Constitution. Is this, according to the Constitution, should this law be allowed or should it not be allowed? We've got a lot of landmark rulings that we're going to talk about today that are going to be used to show the meaning of the Constitution. All right. So every time there's a landmark ruling are often going to be used as reasoning for other decisions. So you'll see, you might hear when studying other judicial cases that as according to the Supreme Court ruled in this case, this is why we're ruling in this case as well. All right. So it kind of sets a precedent. That's very important in law and the judicial review process. So moving on to some notable Supreme Court cases. These are times where the Supreme Court hears a case and they make a ruling based on the Constitution. It either maybe shows an interpretation of the Constitution or maybe suggests a change in the Constitution. And the first one is Marbury versus Madison. All right, Madison in this case is James Madison, the president. He's being sued by a citizen. This is the first case where a part of law passed by Congress was ruled unconstitutional. So this is the first time that we see judicial review used and upheld. So the Supreme Court reviewed the law and found that it does not work under the Constitution. So it was out it goes. Dred Scott versus Sanford. Dred Scott is someone that we're going to study next year in U.S. history, is going to be a slave that sues for his freedom, saying that because he lived in a territory of the United States that did not have slavery, he lived there, he should be a free person, even though his owner brings him back to a slave state a couple years later. And this declares that the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional, declaring some states to be slave and some states to be free states. And that's another thing we'll talk about in U.S. history. But also it determines that slaves were not U.S. citizens and were not guaranteed rights as citizens. So basically it declared slaves as property. All right. It's a very, very important case to look at, and something that we're going to look at that really kind of shows the thinking of the nation at that time. Versus Ferguson. the next one up, it rules that separate but equal does not violate civil rights. This is another landmark case that says separate but equal, meaning there's white bathrooms and black bathrooms, there's white restaurants and black restaurants, basically two of everything. Just because you're separating people doesn't mean that you're violating their civil rights, right? Very, very controversial, but that was the ruling then. Again, it shows how the country was kind of feeling at that time. However, Brown versus Board of Education comes afterwards in the 1950s, and it undoes Plessy versus Ferguson. Brown versus Board of Education rules that segregation of schools, which would fall under Plessy versus Ferguson, as there's two separate schools, but they're equal. It says that this is unconstitutional and rules Plessy versus Ferguson as unconstitutional. So it's one of those court cases that Plessy versus Ferguson was used as kind of the foundation for other rulings, but now they've come back and said, no, we were wrong with Plessy versus Ferguson. Brown versus Board of Education is the correct way that we should look at this, and that segregation is illegal, and that separate but equal does violate civil rights. So the Supreme Court can go back and overrule past verdicts, but it can't do it on the same case. It's got to be a different case. All right, that's an important thing to note. And then our last one we're going to look at is Miranda versus Arizona. And this is where suspects of crimes must be read their rights before and during the arrest. This is what is known as the Miranda rights. It's what you hear on TV that like everything you can be will be held against you in the court of law and all that stuff. All right. So this is where it rules that if you're under arrest, you need to be told that you're under arrest and that you have certain rights. And then that kind of completes the process. All right. So this is going to complete what we're looking at with the judicial branch. We're coming to an end here with the school year, and we're gonna revisit a lot of these ideas coming back when we come back later in the fall. But these are just kind of some foundational things that I want to have laid down before we come back next year. All right. So make sure you check out the two things that I'm gonna have posted along with this. There's going to be an assessment on the judicial branch. There's also going to be another iCivics game that's going to help you decide kind of like which court case should go where. All right. Other than that, if you've got any questions, make sure you email me or come see me during office hours 12:30 to 1. Other than that, have a great rest of your day.